The eviction notice felt like ice against my fingertips, even through the cheap paper. Third one this month. My bank account balance was a cruel joke, hovering just above zero like a vulture waiting for the final breath. Desperation wasn't just knocking anymore. It had kicked the door down and made itself comfortable on my threadbare sofa. That's when I saw the ad, tucked away in the obscure classified section of a website I'm pretty sure runs on digital cobwebs. Caretaker needed for remote estate. Generous stipend. Long-term commitment required. Discretion essential. Solitude guaranteed. It listed only a P.O. box. Solitude guaranteed sounded less like a perk and more like a warning. But generous stipend drowned out the alarm bells. What did I have to lose? A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived. No return address, just my name typed neatly on the front. Inside, a formal letter from a law firm, Finch, Blackwood and Associates, confirming my conditional appointment as caretaker of Blackwood Manor. Conditional on immediate acceptance and adherence to enclosed household guidelines. A hefty advance check was included, enough to make my heart skip a beat and silence any remaining shreds of common sense. The journey itself should have been a red flag. Hours driving away from anything resembling civilization, the paved road dissolving into gravel, then finally a rutted dirt track swallowed by encroaching forest. The GPS had given up an hour ago, leaving me with a hand-drawn map included in the envelope, marked with unsettling landmarks like Weeping Willow Bend and Whisper Creek. Finally, rusted iron gates, twisted like arthritic fingers, sagged open at the end of the track. A weathered stone plaque, half hidden by ivy, read simply, Blackwood. The drive beyond was long and overgrown, branches scraping against the car like skeletal fingers. And then the manor appeared, emerging from the mist-shrouded trees like a gothic nightmare. It wasn't just old. It felt ancient, hunched and brooding under a perpetually gray sky. Stone walls stained dark with time and damp, windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath heavy, moss-covered eaves. A single tower pierced the sky, its peak lost in the low-hanging clouds. The air here was different cold, still, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. No one greeted me. The instructions said the key would be under the gargoyle statue by the massive oak front door, because of course there was a gargoyle. It was heavy, ornate, and freezing cold to the touch. The door groaned open into a cavernous entry hall. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light filtering through grimy, leaded glass windows high above. A grand staircase swept upwards into shadow. Furniture lay shrouded in white sheets, resembling ghostly figures in the gloom. The silence was absolute, oppressive, broken only by the frantic thudding of my own heart and the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere unseen. Taped to the banister of the staircase was another envelope, identical to the first. Inside, the household guidelines, penned in elegant, spidery script. Welcome, caretaker. Rule 1. No visitors are permitted on the grounds. Ever. Rule 2. Confine your activities to the main floor, the designated caretaker's quarters, east wing, second floor, and the kitchens. The west wing and the attics are strictly forbidden. Rule 3. The grandfather clock in the main hall must be wound every evening precisely at 9 p.m. Do not allow it to stop. Rule 4. From sunset to sunrise, remain within the manor walls. Do not venture outside for any reason. Rule 5. Ignore any sounds of crying or whispering emanating from the west wing between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not investigate. Rule 6. Ensure all mirrors are covered with cloths provided in your quarters before you retire for the evening. Uncover them only after sunrise. Your duties are simple. Maintain basic upkeep, ensure the security of the property, and follow these guidelines without deviation. Supplies are stocked monthly in the pantry. Your stipend will be wired electronically. There is no phone line or internet connection. Do not attempt to contact Finch, Blackwood and Associates unless it is a dire emergency. Signaled via the prepaid satellite phone in the study. Use only as a last resort. Your discretion is paramount. I read the list twice, the check in my pocket suddenly feeling less like salvation and more like bait. This wasn't just caretaking. It was something else. Ignore crying, cover mirrors, keep a specific clock wound, and the west wing. My designated quarters were Spartan but clean: a bedroom, a small sitting area, a bathroom. Dust cloths lay folded neatly on the bed. I explored the main floor, a vast, decaying ballroom, a library filled with rotting books, a formal dining room where unseen guests seemed to linger, and the kitchens, surprisingly modern compared to the rest, stocked with enough non-perishables to survive an apocalypse. As dusk began to bleed through the tall, grimy windows, painting long, distorted shadows across the dusty floors, a profound sense of isolation settled over me. The silence wasn't empty. It felt watchful, ancient, heavy with unspoken secrets. I was utterly alone, miles from anywhere, bound by a set of bizarre rules in a house that felt like it was slowly exhaling decay. The generous stipend suddenly seemed pitifully inadequate. Clutching the list of rules, I headed towards the main hall, towards the looming grandfather clock, its pendulum frozen, its face showing the wrong time. Rule 3. Time to wind the clock. The grandfather clock stood like a silent sentinel at the base of the grand staircase, easily 8 feet tall, carved from dark, almost black wood. Intricate patterns snaked across its surface: leaves, vines, and unsettlingly, faces peeking out from the grain. Their expressions frozen in silent screams or vacant stares depending on how the shadows fell. The brass pendulum hung motionless behind the glass panel, and the hands were stopped at 4:30. Felt wrong, like looking at a corpse. Rule 3. The grandfather clock in the main hall must be wound every evening precisely at 9 p.m. Do not allow it to stop. It was only 6:30 p.m. now, but the creeping dread urged me to deal with it sooner rather than later. I fumbled with the small, brass key attached to the clock's side, turned stiffly, emitting a rusty groan. Inside, the complex mechanism of weights and gears looked like the innards of some strange metallic beast. Finding the winding points took a moment, the key fitting snugly. As I began to turn the key, winding the first weight, the clock responded with a low, resonant clunk. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the profound silence, echoing up the staircase and into the shadowed upper floors. With each turn, the weight slowly ascended, the chain rattling softly. Then I moved to the second winding point. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Just as the second weight reached its apex, a faint sound drifted down from the upper floors. Whispering, high-pitched, sibilant, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It seemed to come from the direction of the forbidden west wing. My hand froze on the key. Rule 5. Ignore any sounds of crying or whispering emanating from the west wing between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not investigate. It wasn't between 3 and 4 a.m., but the warning echoed in my mind. Ignore it. I forced myself to focus, turning the key until the mechanism resisted. Finally, I gently nudged the heavy brass pendulum. It swung, slowly at first, then gaining momentum, its rhythmic tick, tock, tick, tock, slicing through the silence. The sound was deep, resonant, almost hypnotic. It felt less like a clock starting and more like a heart beginning to beat within the ancient house. The whispering from upstairs stopped the instant the pendulum began its swing. Coincidence? Setting the hands to the correct time, a task that felt absurdly normal amidst the strangeness. I locked the clock face again, stepping back just as my phone alarm beeped. 6:45 p.m. Sunset. Rule 4. From sunset to sunrise, remain within the manor walls. Do not venture outside for any reason. Rule 6. Ensure all mirrors are covered with cloths before you retire for the evening. Retreating to my quarters in the east wing felt like crossing into a marginally safer territory. I found the stack of plain, heavy linen cloths mentioned in the rules. Methodically, I went through my small rooms, draping the cloth over the bathroom mirror, the small vanity mirror in the bedroom, even the polished surface of the dark, unlit TV screen in the sitting area. The rules didn't specify which mirrors, so I covered anything remotely reflective. The act felt ritualistic, superstitious, yet compelled by a primal fear I couldn't explain. With the mirrors covered and the doors locked, I tried to settle in. Ate a can of cold soup from the pantry. The thought of navigating the dark, cavernous kitchen felt overwhelming. Read a book I'd brought, but the words blurred, my mind constantly straining, listening to the house. The rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock seemed to travel through the very walls, a constant, unavoidable presence. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves, rattling the old window panes in my room. It sounded almost like voices, moaning and sighing in the darkness. Ignore it. Precisely at 9 p.m., I checked the grandfather clock again, just to be sure. It was ticking steadily, keeping perfect time. The heart of the house was beating. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the unfamiliar groans and creaks of the manor and the mournful howl of the wind. I kept glancing at my phone. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., then 3 a.m. The hour struck, and almost immediately the sounds began. Faint at first, then growing clearer, undeniable. Whispering, just like I'd heard earlier, but now tinged with sorrow. And crying. Soft, heart-wrenching sobs, like a child lost in the dark. It emanated clearly from the far end of the house, the west wing. Rule 5. Ignore any sounds between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not investigate. I pulled the thin blanket over my head, pressing the pillow against my ears. But the sounds seemed to seep through, bypassing hearing, settling directly into my bones. The crying intensified, morphing into desperate wails, punctuated by frantic, sibilant whispers that sounded like warnings or pleas. It went on, relentlessly, for what felt like an eternity, but my phone confirmed was exactly 1 hour. At 4 a.m. on the dot, it stopped, cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that felt even heavier, more menacing than the sounds themselves. I lay there, drenched in cold sweat, until the first gray hint of dawn filtered through a gap in my curtains. Sunrise. Only then did I dare to move, uncovering the mirrors, the reflection showing a pale, haunted face I barely recognized as my own. First night survived. But the generous stipend suddenly felt like a pittance for enduring this. And the thought of doing this again, night after night, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. What had I signed up for? And more importantly, what secrets did the West Wing hold? Dawn brought little comfort, merely replacing the oppressive darkness with a gray, washed-out light that seemed incapable of truly banishing the shadows lurking in the manor's corners. The silence after the 4 a.m. cutoff felt brittle, unnatural. I performed the morning ritual of uncovering the mirrors, my own reflection looking increasingly gaunt and wide-eyed with each passing hour. My first full day was spent adhering strictly to Rule 2. Confine your activities to the main floor, the designated caretaker's quarters, and the kitchens. The main floor itself was a labyrinth of decaying grandeur. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for what felt like decades. In the ballroom, shredded tapestries hung like weeping ghosts from the walls, and the floorboards groaned underfoot, threatening to give way. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten things. I focused on the basic upkeep part of my duties, sweeping cobwebs that immediately seemed to reappear, wiping down surfaces only to see fresh dust settle moments later. It felt futile, like trying to hold back the tide with a teaspoon. The house seemed determined to decay, actively resisting any attempt at preservation. Lunch was another lonely affair, canned beans eaten standing up in the surprisingly sterile kitchen. The contrast between the functional, modern kitchen and the crumbling decay of the rest of the manor was jarring. Who had updated this space? And why only this space? After lunch, drawn by an irresistible curiosity, I ventured into the library. Rows upon rows of towering shelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound books. But touching them revealed the truth. Most were crumbling, pages fused together by damp and time, covers disintegrating at the slightest pressure. The smell of rotting paper was overwhelming. Yet, amidst the decay, some sections seemed curated. A shelf dedicated to local folklore, filled with surprisingly well-preserved volumes. Another on architecture, specifically Gothic manors. And tucked away in a shadowed corner, a small collection of handwritten journals, bound in cracking leather just like the books on the shelf. My heart quickened. Were these family journals? Could they hold answers? I reached for the topmost one, its cover embossed with a faded bee. Just as my fingers brushed the leather, a floorboard creaked loudly outside the library door. I froze, listening. Silence. Had I imagined it? Or was something, or someone, moving through the house? The feeling of being watched intensified. Retreating from the journals, I left the library, pulling the heavy door shut behind me, the click of the latch echoing unnervingly. The journals would have to wait. My exploration eventually led me to the boundary explicitly mentioned in the rules. The West Wing. Unlike the ornate, often ajar doors throughout the main floor, the entrance to the West Wing was a single massive slab of dark, unadorned wood, banded with heavy iron. No keyhole was visible. It looked less like a door and more like a seal, ancient and immovable. Pressing my ear against the cold wood, I heard nothing. No whispers, no crying. Just a profound, dead silence that felt somehow more disturbing than the nocturnal sounds. Etched faintly into the wood, almost invisible under layers of grime, were strange symbols, vaguely spiral-like, dissimilar to any writing I'd ever seen. As the afternoon wore on, the silence of the manor began to press in on me. The rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock was the only constant, a steady heartbeat in the otherwise lifeless house. Restlessness gnawed at me. I paced the echoing halls, checking locks, peering into shadowed rooms, constantly glancing over my shoulder. It was during one of these patrols, near the gloomy, sheet-draped dining room, that I heard it. A faint melody, piano music, soft, melancholic, impossibly beautiful, drifting from somewhere within the house. Not the west wing, it seemed closer. Perhaps the ballroom? Heart pounding, I crept towards the ballroom doors, pushing one open a crack. The vast room was empty, dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light. No piano was visible among the shrouded furniture. Yet the music persisted, weaving a sad, complex tune that tugged at something deep inside me. It felt achingly familiar, yet I couldn't place it. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped, cut off mid-phrase, leaving the oppressive silence rushing back in, heavier than before. Was the house playing tricks on me, or was someone else here? I scanned the room, the shadowed corners, the high, cobweb-draped ceiling. Nothing, just the dust, the decay, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. Retreating quickly, I locked myself back in my quarters, the strange melody haunting my thoughts. The day dragged on, each tick of the grandfather clock marking time towards sunset, towards the mandatory winding, towards the mirror-covering ritual, and towards the dreaded hours between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. The solitude, initially a strange comfort, was rapidly becoming a torment. I wasn't just alone in Blackwood Manor. I felt like the only living thing in a house saturated with sorrow and secrets, waiting for the echoes of its past to consume me. The second night followed the grim pattern of the first, each ritualistic action feeling heavier, more charged with unspoken dread. Covering the mirrors felt less like a quirky guideline and more like shielding myself from something malevolent that might look back. Winding the grandfather clock at precisely 9 p.m. felt like placating an ancient, temperamental deity. Its steady tick-tock the only reassurance against the oppressive silence. I spent the evening huddled in my small sitting room, trying to lose myself in a book, but every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. The phantom piano melody echoed in my memory, beautiful and deeply unsettling. Had it been real, a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation? Or was it an echo of the manor's past, bleeding through into the present? Sleep remained elusive. When the clock struck 3 a.m., the sounds began again, right on schedule. The whispering, dry and sibilant, seemed closer tonight, swirling just outside my door. The crying from the west wing was different too, not the desperate wails of a child, but a low, mournful keening, filled with an ancient, inconsolable grief. It resonated deep within my chest, evoking a profound sadness I couldn't explain. I pulled the pillow tight over my ears, focusing on the steady rhythm of the grandfather clock, anchoring myself to that sound until, precisely at 4 a.m., silence slammed back down like a physical weight. The following days offered little respite. The routine became a grim comfort. Wake, uncover mirrors, avoiding my own increasingly haunted reflection. Perform futile cleaning tasks, endure the heavy silence, wind the clock, cover mirrors, dread the coming night. I felt trapped in a loop, the manor itself a decaying time capsule slowly draining my sanity. My exploration continued, driven by a need to understand, to find something tangible amidst the oppressive atmosphere. I meticulously examined the main floor rooms again. In the dusty study, amongst ledgers detailing mundane household expenses from decades past, I found the satellite phone mentioned in the rules. It looked ancient, bulky, and utterly out of place. A single, ominous red light glowed on its surface. Dire emergency only. What constituted a dire emergency in a place like this? Seeing horned skulls in mirrors? Hearing ghostly children cry? Or was it reserved for something far worse? Returning to the library, the collection of handwritten journals beckoned. This time, no creaking floorboards warned me away. Heart pounding, I carefully pulled out the one marked with the faded B. The leather felt strangely cool to the touch. Opening it, I found the same elegant, spritery script as the household guidelines. The entries were dated, starting in the late 19th century. October 12, 1888. Father insists the west wing remain sealed. He speaks of echoes, of sorrows imprinted on the very stone. But the sounds at night, they call to me. Elara says I imagine them, but her own eyes hold a fear she tries to conceal. November 3rd, 1888. The clock arrived today. A monstrous thing. Father says its rhythm will regulate the house, keep the echoes contained. He performs the winding himself each night, a solemn ritual. He forbids anyone else from touching it. December 1st, 1888. Elara is unwell, pale, withdrawn. She spends hours staring into the mirrors, yet claims she sees nothing. The crying from the west wing seems louder, more persistent. I scanned further entries, filled with mundane details interspersed with chilling hints of growing dread. References to the sealed wing, strange illnesses, and the ever-present clock. The writer, presumably a Blackwood ancestor, seemed increasingly consumed by the manor's oppressive atmosphere. Then, a specific entry caught my eye. March 15, 1889. Found a passage. Behind the library shelves. Leads down. Cold smells of earth and something else. Stone door at the bottom, marked with spirals. Same as the west wing seal. Could this be the source? Must investigate further when Father is away. My breath caught. Passage? Behind the shelves? I looked up, scanning the towering rows of rotting books. Where? Which shelves? The entry gave no further clues. Was the passage still there? Was that where the piano music had come from? Before I could investigate, the light outside began to fade rapidly. Sunset was approaching. Panic flared. I needed to wind the clock, cover the mirrors. Slamming the journal shut, I shoved it back onto the shelf, marking its place mentally. The secrets of the passage would have to wait. Survival, adhering to the bizarre rules that governed this place, came first. But now, the rules felt less like arbitrary guidelines and more like desperate measures to contain something truly ancient and terrifying lurking within the manor's decaying heart. Abandoning the library and its potential secrets felt like tearing myself away from a vital clue. But the descending sun painted ominous orange streaks across the grimy windows, a stark reminder of the manor's rigid schedule. Sunset meant rituals. First, the mirrors. The heavy linen cloths felt almost sentient as I draped them over each reflective surface in my quarters. The act was becoming disturbingly familiar, a warding gesture against unseen gazes. Was I covering them to protect myself from seeing something in them, or to prevent something from seeing out? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Then, the clock. Precisely at 9 p.m., I stood before the towering sentinel in the main hall. Its deep tick-tock resonated through the silent manor, a steady, almost judgmental heartbeat. Winding it felt less like maintenance and more like feeding a beast, keeping it placated so it wouldn't unleash whatever horrors it held back. As I turned the key, the metallic clunks echoed again, seeming louder, more significant than before. I couldn't shake the feeling that the clock wasn't just measuring time. It was regulating something within the house, just as the 1888 journal entry suggested. That night, sleep was fractured by vivid dreams fueled by the journal's cryptic entries. I dreamt of spiral staircases descending into impossible depths, of stone doors marked with swirling symbols, and of a pale woman named Alara staring into mirrors with terrified, empty eyes. The whispers and crying from the west wing between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. felt more personal, imbued with a specific, lingering sorrow that seeped into my subconscious. The following day, after the obligatory uncovering of mirrors, my focus was singular: the library passage. Ignoring the futile dusting, I returned to the room, the scent of decaying paper thick in the air. The journal entry mentioned shelves. Behind the library shelves. Leads down. But which ones? I started systematically examining the towering walls of books. Most shelves were built directly into the walls, immovable. Others were freestanding units, heavy oak structures groaning under the weight of crumbling literature. I pushed against them, testing for any hint of a hidden mechanism. Nothing. Hours passed in fruitless searching. Cobwebs clung to my clothes. Dust coated my hands and face. Frustration mounted. Was the journal entry a dead end? Had the passage been sealed long ago? Or was I simply missing something obvious? I returned to the corner where I'd found the handwritten journals, hoping for another clue. As I scanned the shelf again, my fingers brushed against the spine of the journal marked B. It shifted slightly, not the journal itself, but the shelf section it rested upon. My heart leaped. It wasn't a large movement, just a fractional give, but it was there. Kneeling down, I examined the section more closely. It looked identical to the others, filled with dusty, leather-bound volumes. But when I pushed against the wooden panel behind the books, it pivoted inward slightly, revealing a narrow gap of darkness. March 15th, 1889, found a passage. It was real. Adrenaline surged. I carefully removed the books from that section, stacking them silently on the floor. Behind them, the panel was clearly designed to swing inward, though the mechanism was stiff with age and disuse. It took considerable effort, pressing my shoulder against it while trying to remain quiet, but finally, it swung open with a low groan, revealing a narrow opening. Cold, damp air, smelling strongly of earth and stone, flowed out. Peering inside with my phone's flashlight, I saw rough-hewn stone steps descending steeply into pitch blackness, just as the journal described. Leads down. I hesitated. The rules forbade entering forbidden areas, and while this wasn't explicitly the West Wing or the attics, it felt undeniably off-limits. But the potential answers, the source of the piano music, perhaps even the truth about the whispers and crying, it was too compelling to ignore. Just as I resolved to take the first step down, a sound echoed from the main hall, the heavy creak of the front door opening, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps. Someone was here, but Rule 1 stated, no visitors are permitted on the grounds. Ever. Panic seized me. I quickly shoved the books back onto the hidden panel, pushing it closed as quietly as I could manage. It didn't latch perfectly, leaving a hair's breadth gap, but hopefully it wouldn't be noticeable. Holding my breath, I slipped out of the library, peering cautiously down the long corridor towards the entry hall. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the weak daylight filtering through the main doors. Tall, gaunt, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit. For a horrifying moment, I thought it was a ghost, an apparition from the manor's past. Then the figure turned slightly, and I recognized the sharp, wrinkled profile. It wasn't a ghost. It was someone from the law firm, Finch or perhaps Blackwood himself. He stood perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to the house, before slowly, deliberately, beginning to walk towards the grand staircase, his footsteps echoing unervingly in the vast, silent space. He hadn't seen me, but his presence, unexpected and violating the manor's most basic rule, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Why was he here? And did he know about the passage I had just discovered? My instinct screamed at me to run, to retreat back to the relative safety of my East Wing quarters and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Rule 1: no visitors. This man's very presence was a violation, a disruption of the manor's grim equilibrium. But frozen in the hallway, peering from behind a dust-shrouded suit of armor, I couldn't tear my eyes away. The man, tall, gaunt, his dark suit blending into the shadows, moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belied his apparent age. He didn't seem like someone merely visiting. He moved like he belonged here, his steps sure on the creaking floorboards, his gaze sweeping the hall with an air of ownership. Finch, Blackwood, one of the names from the law firm that had hired me. He reached the base of the grand staircase, pausing directly beneath the looming grandfather clock. Its steady tick-tock filled the silence, seeming to count down towards some unseen event. The man didn't look up at the clock face. Instead, he tilted his head back, his gaze fixed on the shadowed upper reaches of the staircase, specifically towards the landing that led to the forbidden West Wing. He stood there utterly still for what felt like minutes, almost as if communing with the house itself, listening to secrets I couldn't hear. Did he know about the whispers, the crying? Did he know what lay sealed behind that massive, unadorned door? Finally, he lowered his head and turned, his sharp eyes scanning the main floor. I ducked further behind the suit of armor, heart pounding against my ribs. Had he seen me? His gaze lingered for a moment on the library door, the very door I had just exited, the door leading to the hidden passage, before moving on. He showed no sign of surprise or curiosity, just a cold, methodical assessment of his surroundings. Then, instead of ascending the main staircase, he turned towards a narrower, servant's staircase tucked away in a shadowed alcove I hadn't previously noticed. It likely led up towards the kitchens and, presumably, the east wing where my own quarters were located. Why take the back stairs? Was he avoiding something on the main landing, or was he heading somewhere specific? Fear warred with curiosity. Hiding felt like the safe, rule-abiding option. But this man, this unexpected visitor, represented a crack in the monotonous facade of my confinement. He might have answers. He was connected to the people who had hired me, who had imposed these bizarre rules. As his footsteps began to fade up the narrow back staircase, I made a split-second decision. Survival might depend on following the rules, but understanding why those rules existed felt just as crucial. Slipping from behind the armor, I crept across the hall, my own footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the Persian rugs. I reached the alcove and peered up the servants' stairs. They spiraled upwards into darkness. I could no longer hear him. Where had he gone? My quarters? The kitchen? Or somewhere else entirely? Taking a deep breath, I started to climb, pressing myself against the wall, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The air here was colder, damper, smelling faintly of grease and stale food from the kitchens below, overlaid with that persistent odor of decay. Halfway up, The staircase opened onto a small landing, branching off towards the kitchen wing. But straight ahead, another door stood slightly ajar, leading towards the main second-floor corridor, the corridor connecting my east wing quarters to the forbidden west wing. Had he gone that way, towards the source of the nightly disturbances? Just as I was about to step onto the landing, I heard a sound from the main corridor beyond the ajar door. Not footsteps, not whispering. It was the soft, melancholic notes of a piano. The same haunting melody I'd heard days before. It was coming from the west wing, and the man from the law firm was nowhere in sight. Had he gone into the west wing? Was he playing the piano? Or had his arrival somehow awakened something else within the manor's sealed heart? My hand tightened on the doorknob leading to the main corridor, the cold brass a stark contrast to the sudden heat prickling my skin. Rule 2 forbade entering the west wing, but the music, beautiful and sorrowful, pulled at me, promising answers wrapped in an undeniable sense of dread. Rule 2 stared back at me from the recesses of my memory, stark and absolute. The west wing, strictly forbidden, but the piano music, achingly beautiful and filled with a sorrow that resonated with my own history of loss, acted like a siren's call. It felt impossibly real, tangible in a house otherwise defined by silence and decay. Where was it coming from? And was the man from the law firm, Finch or Blackwood, listening too? Or perhaps playing? My hand trembled on the doorknob to the main second-floor corridor. Every instinct screamed caution, yet the music pulled, promising revelation. Taking a shallow breath, I turned the knob. It rotated silently, well-oiled unlike most things in this house, and eased the door open just enough to peer out. The corridor stretched before me, longer and dimmer than I remembered. To my right lay the east wing, my own small room a distant refuge. To my left, shrouded in deeper shadow, was the imposing, sealed door of the west wing. The piano music flowed from that direction, clearer now, intricate notes cascading over chords of profound melancholy. It was definitely coming from behind that sealed door. No sign of the gaunt man. Had he already entered the west wing? Or had he retreated, perhaps gone back downstairs? The silence, apart from the music, felt absolute. Heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock downstairs. I slipped into the main corridor, letting the servant's door click softly shut behind me. I moved towards the west wing, keeping close to the wall, utilizing the shadows cast by faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The closer I got, the more powerful the music became. It wasn't just sad. It felt personal, like a lament played specifically for the sorrows held within Blackwood Manor, perhaps even for my own. I recognized the tune now, a classical piece, Chopin maybe, but imbued with an emotion raw and immediate. I reached the massive iron-banded door. Up close, the strange spiral symbols etched into the wood seemed to writhe slightly in the dim light. There was no handle, no keyhole, no visible hinges on this side. How could anyone get in? Was the man trapped inside? Or was the music simply an echo, a memory imprinted on the air? Then I noticed it, a tiny imperfection near the baseboard, a slight discoloration in the wood grain, almost like a keyhole that had been expertly filled and stained, but not perfectly. Kneeling down, eyes straining in the gloom, I saw it was indeed a keyhole, cleverly disguised. But who held the key? Driven by a compulsion I didn't fully understand, I pressed my ear against the cold, smooth wood, just below the hidden keyhole. The music was crystal clear now, achingly close, and underneath it another sound, faint, rhythmic, a soft thump, 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 like a muted heartbeat, or like someone weeping softly, keeping time with the mournful melody. Suddenly, the music stopped. Abruptly, mid-note, the silence that crashed down felt absolute, deafening. Even the weeping sound ceased. Had they heard me? Panic flared. I scrambled back from the door, pressing myself into the darkest corner of the corridor, held my breath, listened. Nothing. The west wing door remained impassive, sealed. Then, from the other end of the corridor, near the main staircase I had avoided, came the soft creak of a floorboard, followed by another. Slow, deliberate footsteps were approaching, heading this way. It had to be him. Finch or Blackwood. Had he been watching me the whole time? Had he heard the music too? Or was he coming to investigate me? Trapped between the silent, ominous west wing door and the approaching footsteps, I searched frantically for an escape. There was none. Just the long, shadowed corridor and the indifferent eyes of the portraits lining the walls. The footsteps grew closer. The footsteps were agonizingly slow, deliberate. Creak, pause, creak. Each sound amplified in the suffocating silence, tightening the knot of fear in my stomach. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The long corridor offered no alcoves, no side doors. I flattened myself against the wall, praying the deep shadows near the west wing door would conceal me. The figure emerged from the gloom near the main staircase. It was him, Finch or Blackwood, the gaunt man in the dark suit. He moved with that same unnerving stillness, his head held unnaturally erect, his sharp eyes methodically scanning the corridor as he approached. He didn't seem surprised or hurried, just inevitable. He stopped about 10 feet away from me, his gaze sweeping past my hiding spot without any sign of recognition. Relief washed over me, cold and premature. But then he paused, head tilting slightly, like a predator catching a scent on the wind. His eyes narrowed, slowly tracking back along the wall, directly towards me. He saw me, there was no doubt, yet his expression remained utterly blank, impassive. No surprise, no anger, no curiosity. Just a cold, empty acknowledgement. "The caretaker," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. It wasn't Finch or Blackwood's voice from any imagined interaction. It was drier, older, like rustling parchment. "You are out of bounds." My throat was tight, words caught behind a wall of fear. I heard music," I managed, my voice a pathetic croak. "Music." He considered the word for a moment, head still tilted. "There is no music in Blackwood Manor, only echoes." He took a step closer. His eyes seemed unnaturally dark in the dim light, pupils dilated, reflecting nothing. "You were listening at the west wing door." It wasn't a question. I thought someone was inside." I stammered, desperately trying to justify my transgression. "There is nothing inside," he said, the emphasis chilling. "Only what remains." He took another slow step. He was close enough now that I could see the fine network of wrinkles around his eyes, the almost translucent quality of his pale skin. He looked ancient, far older than he had appeared downstairs. "Rule 2 is not merely a suggestion, caretaker. It is a necessity for your preservation." Preservation? From what? The question escaped before I could stop it. A flicker of something, amusement, pity, crossed his impassive features. "From the echoes," he whispered, the sound barely audible. From the sorrows that stain these walls, they linger, they seek resonance. He raised a long, thin finger, pointing not at the west wing door, but directly at me. And you, caretaker, resonate strongly. Before I could ask what he meant, his attention shifted abruptly. He turned his head sharply towards the west wing door, his entire body going rigid. He seemed to be listening intently, not with his ears, but with his entire being. From behind the massive, sealed door, a sound began, faint at first, then growing. A soft, rhythmic scraping. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch, like fingernails dragging slowly, deliberately, across stone. Coming closer, the man beside me, Finch, Blackwood, something else entirely, let out a low hiss, almost like air escaping a punctured lung. She awakens, he breathed, the words laced with something that sounded terrifyingly like fear. He took an involuntary step back from the west wing door, his earlier composure shattering. "We must leave this corridor," he said urgently, grabbing my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingers like cold iron. "Now, before she breaches." "Breaches? Who?" I stammered, trying to pull away, my gaze fixed on the west wing door, where the scraping sound was now clearly audible, accompanied by a low, guttural moan. "Alara," he hissed, pulling me forcefully down the corridor, away from the sealed door, back towards the main staircase. The first echo, the strongest. "She must not find you here." His blank eyes were wide now, reflecting a primal terror that mirrored my own. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were desperate defenses against something trapped, something ancient, and something that was apparently waking up. His grip was like a vice on my arm, cold iron digging into my flesh as he dragged me away from the west wing. The scraping sound intensified behind us. Scritch, scratch, crack, accompanied by that low, guttural moan turning into a pained, furious shriek. It wasn't just fingernails on stone. It sounded like the stone itself was splintering, yielding to whatever was trying to get out. "Who is Alara?" I gasped, stumbling to keep up with his surprisingly swift pace. "The first," he hissed, eyes darting back towards the sealed door, wide with a terror that seemed ancient. "The one who listened too closely to the echoes. The one who became the strongest sorrow." He pulled me harder, practically running now. "She resonates with newcomers, drawn to fresh grief. We must reach the main hall. The clock's rhythm offers some insulation. Insulation, resonance." His words were cryptic, terrifying fragments hinting at rules far deeper and stranger than the typed guidelines. We reached the main staircase, the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock growing louder, more distinct. The man released my arm abruptly, shoving me towards the base of the stairs. "Stay within the clock's immediate vicinity," he commanded, his voice regaining some of its earlier flat authority, though the fear still lingered in his eyes. "Do not leave this hall until sunrise." "What about you?" I asked, looking back towards the west wing corridor, expecting the door to burst open at any moment. The scraping and shrieking continued, muffled but undeniably closer. "I must reinforce the seal," he said, his gaze fixed on the shadowed corridor. He produced something from within his dark suit, a small leather pouch that seemed to absorb the dim light. The music distracted her, woke her prematurely. Your presence amplified it. He gave me a final, chilling look, "Do not leave the hall." Before I could respond, he turned and melted back into the shadows, heading towards the west wing, the small pouch clutched in his hand. I was left alone in the vast, echoing entry hall, the rhythmic beat of the clock the only sound besides the distant, terrifying noises from the sealed wing and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Stay within the clock's immediate vicinity. I huddled near the base of the massive clock. Its dark would cool against my back, the steady tick-tock vibrating through me. Felt absurdly like hiding behind a parent's legs. The scraping from the west wing seemed to lessen slightly, replaced by a series of heavy, dull thuds against the sealed door, as if something was repeatedly throwing itself against the barrier. Then came a low, guttural growl of frustration, followed by silence. Had he reinforced the seal? Had Alara retreated? Minutes stretched into an eternity. The man didn't return. The hall remained silent, save for the clock. Where had he gone? Was he trapped in there with her? Or had he simply vanished, his purpose fulfilled? Exhaustion warred with terror. I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, keeping the clock within arm's reach, my gaze fixed on the corridor leading to the west wing. The silence felt precarious, like thin ice stretched over a dark, deep lake. As the first hint of gray began to lighten the grimy windows, signaling the approaching dawn, I heard new footsteps. Not from the west wing. Not the slow, deliberate tread of the gaunt man. These were lighter, quicker, descending the main staircase behind me. I spun around, scrambling to my feet, every nerve screaming. A figure stood halfway down the stairs, cloaked in shadow, smaller than the man, slighter. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it was a woman, or rather, the shape of a woman, indistinct, her features obscured by the gloom and what looked like a heavy veil covering her face. She stood perfectly still, watching me. "Hello!" My voice cracked. Was this another caretaker? Someone else trapped in this house? She didn't answer. Slowly, silently, she continued her descent. She reached the bottom of the stairs, stopping just a few feet away. I could smell a faint scent of lavender and decay emanating from her. "Who are you?" I whispered. She raised a hand, long, pale fingers emerging from beneath a dark sleeve, and lifted the veil slightly. My breath caught in my throat. Her face, it wasn't a face. It was smooth, featureless porcelain, cracked in several places, like an old, broken doll. Two empty black sockets stared out from where eyes should have been. And yet, somehow, I felt an overwhelming wave of sadness emanating from her. A grief so profound it was almost palpable. She tilted her head, the porcelain mask catching the weak light. Then, from behind the mask, a voice emerged, soft, distorted, filled with static, like a badly tuned radio. "Must regulate the echoes." Before I could react, she glided forward, impossibly fast, her hand shooting out, not towards me, but towards the grandfather clock. Her cold, porcelain fingers closed around the brass pendulum. With a sickening crunch of protesting gears, she stopped it. The tick-tock died. Silence, absolute and terrifying, crashed down upon the hall, and from the west wing, echoing through the now unprotected silence, came a single, triumphant, blood-curdling shriek. Alara was free. The shriek that tore through the sudden silence wasn't just loud. It was visceral, a sound of pure, ancient agony mingled with terrifying triumph. It vibrated through the floor, rattled the grimy windows, and seemed to claw its way directly into my skull. The oppressive stillness that followed felt charged, electric, the air thick with anticipation. The porcelain-masked woman stood motionless by the now-silent clock, her featureless face turned towards the west wing door. Her hand remained resting on the stopped pendulum, fingers cold and still. Had she done this intentionally? Was she allied with whatever horror resided in the sealed wing? Or was she merely another broken piece of this house, acting on some unknowable compulsion? The massive west wing door shuddered violently, the iron bands groaning under immense pressure from within. Dust rained down from the doorframe. Scritch, scrape, bam! Something heavy slammed against it, making the thick wood boom like a drum. Then again, bam! A hairline crack snaked across the surface. My legs finally unfroze. Run. Every instinct screamed it. Back to the east wing? Outside? But Rule 4, do not venture outside, and the gaunt man's warning. Stay within the clock's immediate vicinity. Was that protection now void? Bam! Bam! Crack! The door splintered, a large chunk flying inward, revealing utter blackness beyond. A wave of freezing cold, far colder than the ambient air, rushed out, carrying that scent of damp earth and decay, now mixed with the sickeningly sweet smell of rotting flowers. The porcelain woman turned her blank, masked head towards me. Her empty sockets seemed to fix on my terror. Slowly, she raised her free hand, pointing a long, pale finger not at the breaking door, but back up the grand staircase. Her distorted, static-filled voice whispered, "Safe above." Was she warning me, urging me to flee upstairs? Before I could decipher her intent, the west wing door exploded inward with a final, deafening crash, ripped from its frame as if made of paper. From the impenetrable darkness beyond, something emerged. Not a person, not a creature, but a swirling vortex of shadow and gray mist, vaguely humanoid in shape but constantly shifting, coalescing and dissolving. Within its depths, fleeting images flickered, faces contorted in agony, fragments of forgotten rooms, flashes of intense, raw emotion. And the crying. The sound wasn't coming from it, but was it a chorus of heart-wrenching sobs woven into its very fabric? This was Alara, not a ghost, but grief made manifest, an echo given form. She paused in the ruined doorway, the swirling shadows seeming to sense the hall, testing the air. Then, the formless shape surged forward, gliding across the floor with unnatural speed, leaving trails of frost in its wake. It wasn't heading for me, not yet. It flowed directly towards the porcelain-masked woman still standing by the silenced clock. The porcelain woman didn't move, didn't flinch, even as the swirling vortex of grief enveloped her. For a moment, the two figures merged shadow and cracked porcelain, and a single, unified shriek of unbearable sorrow echoed through the hall, a sound that threatened to shatter my very sanity. Then, as quickly as it merged, the shadow form recoiled, pulling back from the porcelain woman, leaving her standing unharmed, still silent, still masked. It was as if she were immune, perhaps too broken, too empty herself to be absorbed by the sorrow. Having failed to merge with the porcelain figure, Alara's formless shape turned. The swirling mass seemed to condense, the flickering faces within momentarily focusing, their collective unseen gaze landing squarely on me. Fresh grief, resonance. The gaunt man's words slammed back into my mind. She surged towards me, crossing the hall in an instant, the wave of freezing cold hitting me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, tripping over the bottom step of the staircase, falling hard, scrambling backwards up the steps on my hands and knees. I watched in abject terror as the vortex of sorrow flowed up after me, whispering my name in 100 different, overlapping voices, the air around me dropping degrees with impossible speed, frost forming on the banister where my hand desperately gripped it. There was nowhere left to run. Alara, the first echo, the strongest sorrow, had found me. Okay, here is part 11 of the Echoes of Blackwood Manor. The Echoes of Blackwood Manor Part 11. The cold was absolute, seeping into my bones, slowing my frantic scramble up the stairs. Alara flowed upwards like a tide of icy despair, the vortex of shadows engulfing the steps below me, the chorus of whispered names and choked sobs swirling around me. Frost spiderwebbed across the stone beneath my palms, burning my skin. I could feel her, not a physical touch, but a crushing weight of sorrow pressing down, threatening to extinguish my very will to resist. Images flooded my mind, unbidden fragmented memories of loss, grief, regret, amplified, distorted, threatening to drown me in an ocean of secondhand despair. Get away! I screamed, kicking out blindly, my foot passing harmlessly through the swirling mist. The entity paused, hovering just below me on the stairs. The flickering faces within the shadow coalesced slightly, forming a distorted approximation of a single, ancient female face, eyes burning with cold fire, mouth open in a silent, continuous scream. Resonate! The combined voices hissed, the sound scraping against my eardrums. Join the echo. She surged upwards again, faster this time. I threw myself sideways, rolling desperately onto the second-floor landing, the freezing cold grazing my back. I scrambled towards the east wing, towards my room, towards any semblance of safety, but the corridor seemed impossibly long, the distance stretching, warping. Suddenly, a resonant clang echoed from the main hall below, startlingly loud in the chaos. It wasn't the clock. It sounded like metal striking metal. Alara hesitated again, the swirling vortex turning, distracted by the sound. Downstairs, near the base of the staircase, the gaunt man Finch/Blackwood reappeared, emerging not from the west wing corridor, but from the shadows near the front door. He held something in his hand, a heavy, iron rod, like a fireplace poker. He struck the silent grandfather clock again. Clang. Alara! His voice boomed, no longer flat or dry, but filled with a desperate authority. Return. The rhythm is broken, but the anchor holds. The shadow entity shrieked, a sound of pure fury and frustration, torn between the fresh grief resonating from me and the command echoing from below. She swirled, undecided, the faces within twisting in conflict. The gaunt man struck the clock a third time. Clang. The seal demands balance. Return. With a final, ear-splitting wail that seemed to shake the manor to its foundations, Alara recoiled from me. The vortex of sorrow flowed rapidly back down the staircase, not attacking the man, but surging past him, pouring back towards the shattered doorway of the west wing, drawn by an invisible tether. The freezing cold retreated with her, leaving only the damp chill of the decaying house. From downstairs, the man shouted up at me, his voice ragged, "The east wing! Now, seal your door." Not needing further instruction, I sprinted down the corridor, fumbling with the key to my room. Bursting inside, I slammed the door shut, ramming the heavy wooden chair from my sitting room under the knob just as heavy, Frantic thuds began to shake it from the outside. Not Alara this time, the porcelain woman. Her distorted, static-filled voice hissed through the wood. Must regulate, stop. The echo. She was trying to get in. Was she trying to stop Alara from reaching me? Or was she trying to contain me for Alara? I leaned against the door, trembling, listening to the wood splintering slightly under her assault, utterly trapped, caught between the manor's warring echoes and its broken regulators. The brief reprieve was over. The nightmare was just beginning. The splintering would groan, the chair wedged under the knob shuddering with each impact. The porcelain woman's static-filled hisses drilled through the door. Regulate, balance, contain, echo. She wasn't trying to hurt me, I realized with a sickening lurch. She was trying to contain me, to keep me here, perhaps as bait, perhaps as the next anchor once Alara inevitably returned. The steady rhythm of the grandfather clock, the house's regulating heartbeat, was gone, and chaos was seeping in. How long until sunrise? My phone was useless, displaying no service as always. I scrambled to the grimy window, pushing aside the heavy curtain just enough to peer out. The sky was still a deep, bruised purple, but the faintest hint of gray was visible on the eastern horizon. Maybe an hour? Less? Another violent crack jolted the door. A long split appeared near the hinges. She was getting through. My eyes darted around the Spartan room. No weapons. Nothing heavy enough to use effectively. The dust cloths? Useless. Then my gaze landed on the heavy linen cloth draped over the vanity mirror. Rule 6. Ensure all mirrors are covered. Why? What happened if they weren't? Alara resonated with grief. The journal mentioned Alara staring into mirrors. An idea sparked, desperate and potentially suicidal. If the mirrors were covered to prevent something from looking out, perhaps uncovering them could invite something else in, or create a reflection, a feedback loop for the echoes. The door buckled again, the top hinge groaning. No time left. Heart pounding, I ripped the cloth from the vanity mirror. Its surface was old, tarnished, reflecting a distorted, terrified image of myself in the gloom. I then scrambled to the bathroom, tearing the cloth from that mirror too. The moment the second mirror was uncovered, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air grew colder, heavier. A faint whispering started, not from outside the door, but from within the room, seeming to emanate from the reflective surfaces themselves. The dim light seemed to ripple, distorting. Outside, the pounding stopped. The porcelain woman went utterly silent. Had it worked? Had I distracted her? Then a new sound began. Soft, slow clapping. Clap, 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 coming from the sitting area of my quarters. Trembling, I edged towards the doorway connecting the bedroom to the sitting room. Peering around the frame, I saw him. The gaunt man, Finch/Blackwood, stood by the window, calmly clapping, his back to me. He was looking out at the approaching dawn. The satellite phone lay discarded on the floor beside him. "You survived," he stated, his voice back to its dry, rustling parchment quality. He didn't turn around. Ingenious using the reflections. Disrupts the regulation sequence. Confuses the lesser echoes. "Who? What are you?" I breathed, still wary. He finally turned, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I am the previous caretaker," he said simply, "or what remains of him, bound here like the others but with certain privileges, certain duties." He gestured towards the now silent door. She won't trouble you further. She only responds to imbalance. And Ilara? She has retreated. For now, sunrise weakens her hold. But she will return tonight, drawn to you. He stepped closer, his dark eyes fixing on mine. You cannot stay here, caretaker. You resonate too strongly. Your own grief calls to hers. Eventually, you will become another echo, absorbed into the manor's sorrow. But the job, the contract, he made a dismissive gesture. Finch, Blackwood, and Associates are merely facilitators, aspects of the manor's influence reaching into the outside world. The contract is with the house itself, and the house always collects. He looked towards the window again. Sunrise is almost here. Rule 4 will soon be lifted. You have one chance to leave. Leave? Just like that. Nothing is ever simple here, he sighed. The gates will allow you to pass now, while the house is weakened by Ilara's failed emergence and the coming light. But you must take nothing with you. No journals, no photos, no physical trace. Only your memories. He paused. And you must never speak of this place. Never write of it. To do so would be to strengthen the echoes, to give them purchase in the world beyond. They would find you. The satellite phone. You used it. He nodded grimly. A dire emergency, signaled the firm. They will reset. Find another caretaker. The cycle continues. He looked directly at me. Your choice. Stay and eventually become part of the sorrow. Or leave now, live with the silence. Carry the echoes within you, forever looking over your shoulder. But live. The first rays of true dawn pierced through the grimy window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The choice felt impossible. Leave and live haunted? Stay and be consumed? I thought of the check, the stipend, the desperation that brought me here. None of it mattered now. I looked at the gaunt man, this spectral predecessor. Will I ever be free? He offered a sad, fleeting smile. Some echoes never fade, caretaker, but distance helps. Decision made. Heart heavy with the secrets I couldn't unsee, the sorrows I couldn't unhear. I turned towards the door, leaving the useless dust cloths, the crumbling journals, the satellite phone, everything behind. As I stepped out into the corridor, the gaunt man remained by the window, a statue bathed in the nascent light. The walk downstairs was surreal. The entry hall was silent. The grandfather clock stood stopped, defeated. The shattered west wing door yawned like a wound. Outside, the world felt impossibly bright, the air clean and cold. I didn't look back as I walked down the overgrown drive, past the rusted gates, leaving Blackwood Manor and its chorus of echoes to fade into the mist behind me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was leaving. Alone, with only the silence and the memories. The stipend nothing but a down payment on a lifetime of looking over my shoulder, forever listening for whispers in the dark.